Hello everyone, this is RaySpace and welcome back to Realism Overhaul Sandbox in Kerbal Space Program 1.12, where I continue to explore Soviet versions of the American Nova rocket concept. The Nova rocket was basically an enlarged Saturn V rocket. Instead of having 5 F1 engines on the first stage, it had 8, and then on the second stage, instead of 5 J2 engines, it had 8. And then it had basically the regular S4B stage at the top from the Saturn V rocket that was used to go to the moon. And so this larger rocket was meant to do bigger things, maybe support a Mars mission or something like that. And actually the launch pads at Cape Canaveral were meant to accommodate that larger rocket, but it was never built. And so I was contemplating Soviet versions of this, but there is a problem with the potential Soviet versions in that the Soviets never really made Hydrolox engines of the same size as the J2, and so in the first video on the Soviet Nova rocket, I went with a smaller engine, a much smaller engine, one with less than half the thrust of the one that was going to be used on the Nova rocket. This time we're going to go with a larger option, which is the RD-120. Now this is not great for various reasons. It's hard to make it optimal, but also it only has one ignition. So we are going to have to use the second stage to make orbit in order to ensure that this stage can then do the transfer to the moon is what we're aiming for, or whatever transfer it is going to be doing, and use its one ignition, and that's all it can use. Now, probably somebody's got to tell me that the RD-0120 really could ignite more than that, and to be honest, yeah, maybe, and also other people might say it can't light mid-air, and that also is a possibility. So we're caught in the middle of those two things, but at least the ones that I have in here have one ignition, and they can ignite in the air, so we're going with that. So they're very powerful, and we don't have any worries about thrust-to-weight ratio or burn times. Those are nice. As a result of the extra thrust, though, since we also have 8 of them here, RD-0120s, these are from the Energia rocket. They're basically the equivalent of the Space Shuttle main engines, so they're very powerful and very efficient. But yeah, because they are so powerful, we had to make the second stage wider and longer. So no longer is it the same diameter as the one on Nova, but there were variants of Nova where this stage might have been larger, so it depends. But it is now the full 12.2 meters that this stage has. I made sure that this was aluminum gridded tank. We had a little bit of a foible at the end of the previous video where I found out that that was accidentally a composite tank, probably because I just was clicking around and accidentally hit that. But now we've got aluminum gridded tanks, just the basic tanks, so they're not super efficient or anything. And this is a huge tank compared to the first stage. The first stage is very small by comparison because its propellants are very dense. So that's why it's like that. Thrust-wise, of course, the first stage has way more thrust than the second stage by a factor of more than 3. But because hydrogen is hydrogen, we need the bigger tanks. So that's how it is, but we're still retaining the 6.2 meter tank at the top, sort of like the S4B, but I have an expansion tank here to make better use of it. So, given that this is the setup, how much do you think this can send to the moon? I'll wait, give you a guess. Alright, if you said 105 tons, that's what I think. Based on the numbers here, that's what I'm going for, 105 tons. And we are going to see if I can make that happen. That means that this rocket has the same capacity to the moon that SLS Block 1B would have to low Earth orbit. So that's pretty impressive, considering it's only 50% larger than the SLS Block 1B. And this is smaller than the versions of the American UR-700A that I had proposed before. In this video, I will also check out the nuclear option, but we'll get to that. Let's just check this out first. We are once again launching from Baikonur, and there's no way to launch directly into the plane of the moon from Baikonur, so I'm just gonna be assuming an off-plane transfer, and we'll go now because there's nice daylight, and so it's better that way. So SAS on, throttle up, And the RD-270s burning UDMH and NTO. Ignition. And launch. It's a very low thrust to weight ratio, 1.15, but it doesn't look that bad right now. It looked a little bit slower with a big tower next to it. We are past the speed of sound. Okay, staging. We're too low for fairings just yet. Well, it definitely looks like I went a bit too horizontal with the first stage. But this should have enough thrust to weight ratio to catch itself here. Alright, I'll risk dumping fairings even though this bit is really wide. Oh, bad idea. Okay, well, I'm gonna up the fairing ejection force, and I am going to try to go a little bit more vertical initially as well. Yep, that did not work out great. Okay, here we go again. Throttle up, SAS on, ignition. And launch. Alright, staging. Tempted to stage the fairings even though it's this low, but probably not a good idea. Well, now it seems really tight. Let me let go of the fairings. Hopefully it'll work out. Okay, they're nice and vigorously ejected, but this is really tight. We need to get into orbit on this stage. Maybe some happy medium between the trajectory I had last time and this one. This one, I don't know, we still do need time. Maybe 105 tons is too much. Maybe I should just go for a clear 100 tons. Now with the RD-57Ms that we had last time, the weaker engines, that got 85 tons to orbit, basically. Not to orbit, to the moon. Interesting, they're sort of doing the effect that would happen when I'm in time warp. I don't know. The plumes on these definitely need to be fixed. Not my mod. I think I'm expecting too much from this stage. So, somebody wondered why I wasn't using 8 RD-170s at the bottom of the rocket, since those are kerosene oxygen engines like the F1 engines on Saturn V, and they are more powerful than the RD-270s that we are using here. The reason is because then you have 32 nozzles at the bottom, because the RD-170s, each engine unit has 4 nozzles, and so it doesn't look right. It doesn't look like a Nova, and I would be displeased by that. I want the rocket to be, you know, visibly identifiable as a Nova variant, and that would not allow it to be that way. So that's why I'm not using the RD-170s. It looked more like super heavy first stage than a Nova. Well, we're obviously not going to make it here. And I don't think I tossed it up so high that we can keep this payload. So 105 tons, a little bit too much. Let me try and fix that a bit. But still, maybe I went a little bit too steep on the first stage. Maybe I'll try Ascent guidance as well. But I think 100... I don't know, maybe I should try Ascent guidance with it like this. That initial thrust-weight ratio is what's really killing us. So 100 tons. And then we'll also make the transfer stage smaller by reducing the length of this. It's got a low burn time, so the delta V can be pretty tight to our lunar transfer requirements without it being a problem. So we got a little bit more delta V there. Let's try Ascent Guidance to see if that's going to be a good fit for it. Okay, well, we have to set it to our current latitude. There we go. Auto staging should be fine. We don't really need it to limit acceleration, that's for sure. Okay, ignition. And launch. Tight. It's only saying that we have 140 left in the second stage, so right now it's not very confident. And it's becoming less confident that it's going to make it on the second stage. Uh-oh. Yeah, we don't want it to use the third stage because it only has one ignition. It has turned very, very quickly in a bad way. I mean, it's turning faster than I did, and that's not a good thing. I don't know what it's doing. It did this with my station carrier as well. It's just gonna crash into the surface at this rate. Okay, look. We'll go through all the numbers that I've got as settings, and you tell me what the heck is going on with this, because I don't use Ascent Guidance normally. Normally I just fly the rockets, or I use KOS to fly the rocket. But it ought not to be doing that at all. So the attach altitude's not indicated, and we've got a booster pitch start and a booster pitch rate. I mean, normally I shouldn't even have to write such things in. Fixed coast length should be 0. We don't want to coast. Auto staging force roll. That's fairing staging, which I don't want it to do anyway. But it would be alright. There's nothing in here that I think should make it do that. I'm going to... I mean, logically, you would want to reduce the pitch rate, but every time I've done that, it seems to pitch even more. I'm gonna go to 0.2 degrees per second. Even just the idea of having it as per second is just a bad idea. It really shouldn't be a rate per second. Yeah, that's not how I would want... that's not how I write my KOS scripts, let me put it that way. So, anyway, let's see. I've reduced it to 0.2, and we'll see how it goes. I'm also going to lock the third stage, so it doesn't think that it can use that. No third stage. Okay, well this time it's not turning as much, thankfully. But essentially this means that I have to figure out the number and basically do what I would normally do anyway. Okay, staging. I think it tried to stage the fairings already. I'll just stage them now. It's a little bit early, but... yeah, still not good enough, but it was sort of a waste to go this high up. I'm gonna assume that that negative 340 holds and adjust. So the net result of this is that the more powerful engines don't get that much more, as it turns out. That is the result we are seeing here so far. Thrust is nice, but basically this stage is being somewhat hampered by the lower stage, which of course, looks comically small compared to the second stage. But what we would like is actually, since these are about 2,000 kilonewtons in vacuum, probably this stage we would like the engines to be more like 10,000 kilonewtons in vacuum. So just, a modest amount more, 50% more thrust. But right now this is not doing enough work compared to the second stage, and that's what's really hampering this as far as the payload capacity of the rocket. So, yep, we're asking a lot out of that stage. It would also be helpful if the next stage, this stage, had more than one ignition. If it had more than one ignition, then we could use that to complete orbit. Maybe we can have some sort of secondary option. The Soviets liked having secondary options. I mean, if we put like 2 RL-10 class engines on here, to finish orbit, that could work out. But that still doesn't quite fit with the Saturn V, not Saturn V, the Nova motif. But our issue is that there's two possibilities. Either I add more ignitions to the RD-0120, or I add some secondary engines to this. Let me look up the RD-0120 and see if there's any excuse I might have for adding the ignitions. Yeah, I don't see a reason. Let me just continue with this variant. We'll ponder that separately. We'll just keep it within the limitations. So we can't get as much as we were trying to. 95 tons now. So basically, the main limit is how much initial thrust you have, and that sort of makes sense, or how much your total mass is. There's not a whole lot you can do to push a rocket at this mass to launch more than 95 tons to the moon. I mean, so we're at 95 tons. That's still more than 2% of the launch mass of this being sent to the moon, which is pretty crazy. Of course, we could use something better than aluminum gridded tanks. If we went to aluminum lithium, maybe we'd be better off. But I wanted that aspect of this to be fairly conservative. And still, I think the numbers are pretty nice. So, yeah. We're now packing more than 9,500 meters per second between the first and second stages. I mean, would it be beneficial to extend this? That's 9,600, but it does reduce the thrust-to-weight ratio, so do we want that, or do we just want more thrust-to-weight ratio? I feel like having more thrust-to-weight ratio is better. I'm gonna bring it down till it's an even 9,500 there. So that's 9,500, but it doesn't help our initial thrust-weight ratio that much. It just helps that thrust-weight ratio. We'll see if that ends up doing a good thing for us or not. It looks like we're going to have to handle the nuclear option in a subsequent video. This is already going to be fairly longish. Now, should I try Ascent guidance, or should I just do this myself? We'll try Ascent guidance but one more time, and then I'll go back to my own devices. I'll go with 0.25. I think the initial, maybe 0.3. The initial turn was a little bit slow. But then, once we get to the second stage, it was pretty rough. Hopefully, the fact that I've reduced its size might help in this case. Okay. Let's go. Oh, you know what? Let's go to a lower orbit, though. Okay, now let's try that. It's only reading 500 to spare there, though. That's not a good start. It might be turning a bit fast here. Don't you dare think you can use this fuel. Alright. Staging. we're still technically positive at staging there. And in fact, the margin is going up. I'm just gonna get rid of the fairings now if it doesn't mind. Alright, getting close to 4 Gs right at the end, but that's not too bad. And we have made orbit with 130 meters per second to spare, which I think is as tight as I want it to be. So we're not gonna try and squeeze more out of it, but at least it worked this time. 0.3 booster pitch rate seems to be good, and changing the altitude we were going for is a good idea. Okay, so obviously that should be down, and separation. I don't know if the thrusters on here are working right. This is, again, not my setup necessarily. It should be using the UDMH and NTO, but they might, well, it is using some of it. Maybe it's just the plumes aren't there. Okay. Alright. Well, that's not right. 2,000? Oh, right, there's this expansion tank. Whoops. Okay, 3,187. Let's plot for the moon. Well, that's very polar. I mean, for certain purposes, that's what we would like. So we'll just leave it like that. Okay, so that's getting close. Now with this thrust-weight ratio, since this doesn't have a very long burn time, can we do that? Okay, here we go. Ignition. There goes the spent stage. Okay, 2.1 left. Well, maybe I shut it off a little bit early, but maybe the RCS can handle the rest here. Okay, well, that's crashing into the moon. We don't need to do... Oh, wait. It was in phys warp, so it isn't crashing into the moon. Alright, nice polarish orbit there. And pretty close. 7 days, though, but that'll be fine. 95 tons to the moon. Not as much as I was thinking I would get out of it, but if we just add an extra ignition on here, maybe that'd be good. Maybe next time, in addition to the nuclear option, I'll explore that. For now, though, that is the version of the Soviet Nova using the RD-0120s, the more powerful engines, and it's not that huge a gap between the RD-57Ms and these, but part of it was that we were hampered by the limitations of the first stage and the ignitions that we have here. So lots of stuff going on, but that was the test of this Soviet Nova variant. And with that, I'll say thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do press like. If you have any comments or suggestions, please leave them in the comment section below, and I'll see you next time.